You want to be comfortable and you want to have friends and you want to be like early days, being like short, being 5 feet tall.
Danny DeVito just turned 80, and from the outside his life looks like a Hollywood fairy tale. A kid from a working-class New Jersey town who became one of the most recognizable faces in American comedy. But underneath the laughter, DeVito has spent decades quietly carrying a physical condition that never lets up, a marriage that ended without ever fully ending, and a body that has been in pain for most of his adult life. This is the part of his story that doesn't usually make the highlight reel. Daniel Michael DeVito Jr. was born on November 17, 1944, in Neptune Township, New Jersey, the youngest child of Daniel Sr. and Julia DeVito. His father ran a string of small businesses over the years, including a candy store and a pool hall, while his mother stayed home raising the family. He grew up in nearby Asbury Park with two older sisters, in a tight Italian-American Catholic household. It wasn't a glamorous childhood, but it was the kind of ordinary, working-class upbringing that shaped how he carried himself for the rest of his life, practical, funny, and never pretending to be something he wasn't. What set DeVito apart early on was something he had no control over. As an adult he would stand just under 5 feet tall, the result of a rare genetic bone condition called multiple epiphyseal dysplasia, also known as Fairbanks disease. It's a disorder that affects how cartilage and bone develop, and it doesn't just determine height. It can bring joint pain, stiffness, and early arthritis that builds over a lifetime. As a kid, his small stature made him an easy target. He's spoken before about being teased for being different, and like a lot of kids who get singled out, he learned early how to use humor as armor. It would become the foundation of his entire career. His parents sent him away to Oratory Preparatory School in Summit, New Jersey, hoping a more structured environment would serve him well. For a while, DeVito has said, he even considered becoming a priest, before more typical teenage interests took over. After graduating in the early 1960s, he didn't head straight into show business. Instead, he took a job as a cosmetologist, working in his sister Angela's beauty salon. He was good at it, and for a man who would later become famous for his rough, gravelly delivery and chaotic comic energy, there's something almost funny about the fact that his first real profession was making people look polished. It was actually through that beauty school connection that DeVito found his way toward acting. He enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, originally intending to study makeup techniques. But the theater classes pulled him in a different direction entirely. He realized something most aspiring actors never get to discover about themselves: his height, which had made him a target as a kid, made him impossible to ignore on a stage. He couldn't play the conventional leading man, so he didn't try. He leaned into being distinctive instead, and it worked. The years that followed his graduation in the mid-1960s were lean ones. He took small parts in off-Broadway productions, worked odd jobs to pay rent, and slowly built a reputation in New York's theater scene. One of those plays was a 1971 production of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where he played a patient named Martini. Years later, when Milos Forman was casting the film adaptation, DeVito got to reprise that same role on screen. It was 1975, and even though his time on camera was brief, it put him in front of audiences for the first time on a national scale. The film would go on to sweep the major Academy Awards that year. Around this same period, DeVito's personal life was quietly falling into place too. In January 1971, he met an actress named Rhea Perlman at a small theater performance. They moved in together within weeks and would go on to date for over a decade before finally marrying in January 1982. By then DeVito had already landed the role that would define the next phase of his career: Louis De Palma, the foul-mouthed, miserable taxi dispatcher on the sitcom Taxi, which premiered in 1978. Louis wasn't likable in any conventional sense, but DeVito made him magnetic, and audiences couldn't look away. The role earned him both a Golden Globe and an Emmy Award, and it turned a guy who used to get typecast for his height into one of the most talked-about character actors on television. When Taxi ended its run in 1983, DeVito didn't fade the way a lot of sitcom stars do. He made the leap to film and made it look easy. That same year he appeared in Terms of Endearment, which won Best Picture. The following year came Romancing the Stone, opposite his old friend and former roommate Michael Douglas, a film that turned into one of the biggest hits of 1984 and led to a sequel. DeVito kept stacking up roles through the rest of the decade: Ruthless People, Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and The War of the Roses, reuniting him with Douglas and Kathleen Turner. He'd also started directing by then, making his debut behind the camera with the dark comedy Throw Mama from the Train in 1987, a film he only agreed to act in on the condition that he could direct it too. By the early 1990s, DeVito wasn't just acting and directing, he was building something bigger. In 1991, he and producer Michael Schamberg founded Jersey Films, later joined by Stacey Sher. The company became one of the most important independent production houses of the decade, eventually backing Pulp Fiction in 1994, a film many studios had passed on. DeVito also took on darker, more dramatic material around this time, directing and co-starring in Hoffa with Jack Nicholson, and stepping into the role of the Penguin in Tim Burton's Batman Returns, a performance so committed and strange that it earned him a Best Villain nomination at the MTV Movie Awards. In 1996, DeVito directed Matilda, based on the Roald Dahl novel, casting himself and Rhea Perlman as Matilda's neglectful parents. It remains one of his most beloved projects, partly because of how warmly it's remembered by fans who grew up with it, and partly because it captured something real about DeVito and Perlman's chemistry as performers and as a couple. But all the while, the condition he'd lived with since childhood never went away. Fairbanks disease doesn't just affect height, it wears down joints over time, and DeVito has spent decades managing pain that most of his audience never saw. He kept working through it, taking physically demanding roles, doing stunts, and rarely talking publicly about what it actually cost him physically to keep showing up on set. In an industry that often treats vulnerability as a liability, DeVito mostly chose to keep his struggles private and let the work speak instead. In 2006, at the age of 61, DeVito joined the cast of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia as Frank Reynolds, a sleazy, scheming bar owner who became an instant fan favorite. The show had only been on for one prior season and was still finding its footing. DeVito's arrival is widely credited with giving it the boost it needed to become the long-running cult hit it is today. Now closing in on 2 decades on the show, he's still there, still throwing himself into increasingly chaotic physical comedy well into his late 70s, a level of commitment that's remarkable for any actor, let alone one managing a lifelong joint condition. The hardest chapter of DeVito's recent life, though, isn't about his career at all. In 2012, after 30 years of marriage, he and Rhea Perlman separated. It came as a surprise to a lot of fans who had watched the two of them build a life together both on screen and off, going all the way back to their early years sharing a cramped apartment before either of them had made it. The couple reconciled for a stretch in 2013, only to separate again for good in 2017. What makes their story unusual is what happened after. They never filed for divorce. Reports over the years have described them remaining close, living near each other, and staying involved in each other's lives and in the lives of their 3 children, Lucy, Grace, and Jake. It's not the clean, tidy ending most celebrity marriages get, and that ambiguity, neither fully together nor fully apart, is its own kind of quiet sadness for 2 people who spent the better part of 50 years as each other's closest collaborator. Even with that personal upheaval, DeVito kept working, almost as if the work itself was part of how he coped. He continued acting in films through the 2010s and into the 2020s, including a role in 2021's The Survivor and a turn in Disney's live-action Haunted Mansion in 2023. He's voiced animated characters audiences have grown up with, from the Lorax to roles in Hercules and Smallfoot. He also made his Broadway debut in 2017 in a revival of Arthur Miller's The Price, earning a Tony nomination in his 70s, proof that even after everything, he was still chasing new challenges rather than coasting on nostalgia. What makes DeVito's story land differently than a typical Hollywood biography is the contrast at its center. Here's a man who built an entire identity and an entire career around being different in a town obsessed with conventional appearances. He turned a condition that caused him real, ongoing physical pain into a defining strength rather than something to hide or fix. And yet the toll was always there underneath it, both physically, in the joints and the discomfort that came with decades of demanding physical comedy, and personally, in a marriage that never resolved into a simple happy ending or a simple breakup. At 80, Danny DeVito is still working, still showing up, and by most accounts still finding things to laugh about. But the quieter parts of his story, the chronic condition he's managed since childhood, the family life that settled into something neither resolved nor over, are a reminder that even the people who make us laugh the hardest are often carrying something heavier than they let on. DeVito built a career out of refusing to apologize for who he was. Maybe that's also the key to understanding how he's kept going this long, not by pretending the hard parts didn't exist, but by simply continuing to work through them, one role at a time, for over half a century.